Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to the book wormhole. Now, you may be wondering, why am I doing this as a live video? I don't usually do that. Usually my wrap-up videos are pre-recorded. I have tried filming this wrap-up 2 times now. And the first time I filmed like all of it, and then my computer crashed and I lost all of my footage. And then today I tried filming again, and for some reason my microphone just isn't working. All it like picks up is just static, and it's like really loud and you can barely hear what I'm saying. So between those two things going wrong, I'm sick of this. I just want to get this wrap up done. And so I had the idea of just, okay, why don't I just do my wrap up live if anyone shows up to watch this live and wants to interact with this, ask questions or comments about the books I'm going to be talking about. That'd be awesome. If you don't, that's fine. You can watch this later. Unfortunately, this won't be edited, so it's going to be a little bit of a longer video. I've kind of just accepted that at this point. I'm getting pretty sick of my setup. My microphone is always fighting against me, and despite the fact that I actually paid for my video editing program, without fail, every time I export my videos, something's wrong with them, and I'm just getting tired of fighting against it. Like, I paid money for both of these things, and neither of them really work the way they should. So I'm hoping next year to revamp everything and hopefully get a better setup. So because this is the October wrap up, and because October is spooky month, I decided to do a closet cosplay Halloween costume. Obviously, I'm dressed as Wednesday Addams. I know it's not super creative, but I just really like the Addams Family. I grew up on it. I watched the black and white TV show as a child, which, like, come to think of it, between watching that and the Monsters as a child, I don't know why my parents were really surprised that I grew up wanting to dress goth, and love Halloween. So yeah, this is my way of celebrating Halloween, because otherwise I'm not doing anything for Halloween besides just working. All right, so let's get into my October wrap up. This past month, I was hosting the Monster High Readathon. This is my first time ever hosting a readathon, so it was a very fun experience for me. I got a lot of reading done this month. I read 8 books, and I crossed off 11 out of 12 prompts. I'm currently working on the last prompts, but I don't think I'll finish reading it in time, so, because I'm this far, and yeah, I'm just not reading it that fast. But I am enjoying the book, so I'll be putting that in next month's wrap up instead. And for me, it's not about, like, winning the readathon. For me, it's just about reading and enjoying what I am reading. I'm also thinking about, for this video, talking about like the Monster High reboots that finally came out this month, just because it's Monster High related, and I don't really want to do a separate video for it, because this is a book focused channel. So I might talk about that at the end of the video. If I don't, it's because I lost motivation. And if you're watching this later and you're not interested in Monster High specifically, and just skip it. Again, it'll be at the end of the video. I don't know if I can add chapters afterwards, after like filming a live video, but I'll try to do that if at all possible. So anyone watching later can kind of skip around the video like I would do with my usual wrap-up videos. Okay. So let's talk about what I read this month. I'm going to pull up my story graph. Okay, so the first book I read this month was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is one I've been long anticipating because it's gotten so much hype. And I read this one for the prompt Rainbow, which is LGBT character. So this book is about a orc adventurer who decides to leave her adventuring squad to pursue her true passion, which is coffee. So she decides to open up a coffee shop. So honestly, the concept I really love. I love playing orcs in D&D, and this is definitely a good book for someone who likes D&D. So yeah, the concept was really cool, especially like with this contrast of the main character is like this. It never really gave her class, but I assume she's probably a barbarian. And so she decides that she doesn't like fighting people anymore or fighting for money, and decides that she wants to open up a coffee shop. And she opens the first coffee shop in this cute little town, and she's the only orc in town too. So it had such a cool setting and such a cool concept. However, it's definitely a book that's on the lighter side. All the conflicts in this book are very quickly resolved, which sometimes I didn't always enjoy because it kind of felt like the triumphs were unearned. And so it would pretty much be like every chapter, like there would be some sort of problem, usually regarding the coffee shop. For example, one of the issues was the shop was very hot because there's like a running oven and the like coffee machine, so it would make it really warm and uncomfortable for the customers. And so the main character, Viv, goes to her carpenter friend who helped her fix up the shop and was like, hey, can you help me do something about this? And then he like designs this, air circulation device for the shop, and it immediately works. And that's pretty much like how the whole story goes. So I didn't always like that. However, like it was very feel good, and I think my favorite part of the book was at the very end, where everyone that Viv had met along the way came together to help her, which like although like super tropey, like I just thought it was so cute, and I think that really like captured what the book was trying to achieve. So I did read this for the prompt LGBT, and obviously the main character's a lesbian, or at least ends up in a relationship with another woman. She ends up in a relationship with actually probably my favorite character, who is Tandri, and she's a succubus. But instead of like being like highly sexual, which you would assume like a succubus would be, she's like really cutesy and like, definitely like your coffee shop AU love interest type, which I really enjoyed. But I was kind of expecting there to be more like flirtation or like mutual attraction along the way, before they finally get together in the end. And also, there was like this other character from Viv's past adventuring party that I kind of interpreted to be Viv's ex-girlfriend. And not that I wanted to see a plot where like that caused drama between her ex, but I kind of wish that was established that yes, this is her ex-girlfriend, just to like introduce earlier in the story that Viv is someone who is attracted to women. So yeah, I kind of felt like, though it wasn't like a sapphic story, I felt like there could have been more of like that like presence in the story. And I also thought, like, as far as the fantasy world went, it was pretty simplistic and a lot wasn't explained. But I think that's kind of the point. I think it's a really easy book for someone to pick up. I think on Goodreads it's listed as a cozy mystery, whereas it doesn't really have a mystery element, it definitely has that cozy element. I would call this a cozy fantasy. So it was very nice to read. I gave this one 3 stars, which is kind of my rating for like I enjoyed reading it, but it wasn't super impressive. And I know Travis Baldree is planning on writing another book in this series, but I think it follows other characters just in the same world, but I don't think I'll be reading on. Okay, so the next book I read this month was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This one, I gotta admit, I started reading earlier this year and I read most of it. I think I got like 70% of the way through. Um, I don't remember what month, but like months ago. And then I decided I'd rather listen to it on audiobook. And then I requested it at the library and I was on the waiting list up until this past month. So yeah, I don't know if this is technically cheating to can like use this book for the readathon because I read most of it in a different month, but I did just want to finish this book finally, and it worked for like categories for this readathon. I ended up reading this one for the category Hezekiah, which was a book about family. And even though this is a contemporary romance where the focus is on romance, I thought it worked so well for the family category because the main character, who I don't remember her name right now, uh, Nora? Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So the main character, Nora, like a lot of her plot revolves around her relationship with her sister. Her sister kind of jumpstarts this book by insisting that they should take a vacation to one of Nora's like clients. She's a literary agent, so one of her authors had written a very popular novel that takes place in this small town, and her sister's like, we should go there. And as well as her relationship with her sister, it's also a lot about Nora's relationship with her mom, who had passed before this book started and had passed when Nora was 20, and how that impacted her. And I thought it was really cool how much of a presence her mom has in this story, despite like not being alive for any of it. And even with Nora's love interest, Charlie, like he's from this small town originally, and so like his parents are involved in the story, like his stepfather is involved, and even his cousin plays a love interest rival in this story. So a lot of family was involved in it. And I also, what I really liked about that is that this book had so much more sustenance to it than just a romance plot. That like these characters, both Nora and Charlie, had these fully realized lives outside of their romance. So I was super impressed with that. I don't really read romance, and I definitely don't read contemporary romance. So this was a book that was definitely outside of my comfort zone. But I kind of had it in my mind that it would be something like a Hallmark movie where like it's really sappy and characters are kind of one-dimensional because, you know, they're written to be able to be projected upon. But this book was so much deeper than that. Nora experiences character development outside of just her romance plot, which I really appreciated. And another thing I really liked about it is I liked her chemistry with Charlie. As soon as this character was introduced, I knew he was going to be the love interest, and I was really intrigued by him. They're slightly like an enemies to lovers plot, but mostly it's when they first meet, they kind of just get off on the wrong foot. It was a bad day for both of them, where they had like huge personal life changes happen to them when they met for like this work conversation that didn't go so well. But it becomes clear that these two people are very similar and that they understand each other because they're very similar types of people. And yeah, they just had that like instant connection where it wasn't all just like, you know, them insulting each other, which I feel like enemies to lovers can come across as. Um, but it was actually really fun to read them interact with each other, you know, and I could definitely see it. So yeah, I was pretty impressed with this one. This one's going to be a 4.5 stars from me, and though I don't think I'm quite converted to being a romance reader, I would consider reading another book by Emily Henry because I think she did a really good job with this, and I'm pretty sure her other books are probably very similarly written, or developed, I should say. Let me rehydrate. It's like part of the reason I edit my videos. Half of the editing is just me drinking water. Okay, so the next book I read was, oh, I actually have this one with me. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I read this one for the Freaky Flaw prompt, which was a character with a tragic past. This one's pretty interesting because it is a very light sci-fi. Yeah, and like I feel like the draw of this book isn't the sci-fi elements. It's more the characters. So this takes place in a somewhat contemporary setting. It feels very similar to our world, but the main characters grew up in this like boarding school where things are kind of done a little bit differently, and that's because they're being prepared for a life that's going to be very different from like what we would live. They were pretty much created for a certain purpose, and that purpose would mean that they don't get to have a very long life. Um, so that's how I interpreted the tragic past for the prompt. But my main draw for this one was definitely, like I said, the characters. My favorite aspect of this book was how, like, authentically Kazuo Ishiguro captured childhood and like people's relationships to each other. I thought like all of the like inside jokes and like games that the characters would play with each other were things that like I experienced, not like definitely not like one to one. It's not exactly what I experienced, but it just like really captured that essence of childhood and how kids interact with each other. And I thought like all the characters' flaws and the ways they acted to each other was again just very organic. Like he really captured the essence of humanity in this book. And this is a very like slow pace, like enjoy it at your own speed read, and very atmospheric as well. I think this one also takes place in Britain, so this would count for the abroad category, even though I was trying so hard not to do a book that takes place in Britain for the abroad. I wanted to do something like a little bit more unique than that. Didn't work out this month. But my only criticism for this book is kind of the sci-fi elements. I found that it was a very like intriguing idea, but I do think that it wasn't fully developed, and I definitely had questions about how things were done in this world that weren't exactly answered, and I think the author kind of just took advantage of not explaining that just to like ignore like the practicality of the sci-fi elements. But other than that, like really enjoyed this read. I have another book by Kazuo Ishiguro that I want to read, and I'm really excited to read it because I enjoyed this. I thought his writing style was fantastic. So this one is a 4.5-star read for me. Okay, what did I read next? Ooh, okay. So the next book I read was another long anticipated read. It was Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. This one I read for the category Freaky Fusion, which is a hybrid of two or more genres. This book is very much a fantasy set in a sci-fi setting. And I also ended up reading this one for Day of the Dead, book about death, because this book is about necromancers. There's a lot of death in this book. Not even just death, but resurrection from death. And maybe some characters dying too, so it works. And there's LGBT presence in this book as well. So Gideon the Ninth is about this like futuristic world where everyone lives on different planets, and also technology is kind of really limited too in a way, and magic exists, but the only magic that exists is necromancy, which I thought was really cool. I feel like whenever there's necromancy in a story, it's like a subset of magic, whereas this is the only kind of magic. um so Gideon the Ninth is, called the Ninth because she lives on the ninth planet, and she is a swordsman who is kind of forced to accompany her mortal enemy, Harrow, as Harrow travels to the first planet to learn how to be a lictor, which is a type of like ultimately powerful necromancer. However, all the previous lictors are dead at this point, so there's no one to teach how to be a lictor. So instead, they're like in this like castle maze environment where they have to solve puzzles in order to unlock lessons of how to be a lictor. So, what I liked about this book was the beginning was absolutely fantastic from like an editor standpoint, because I read so many first three chapters of manuscripts. um the first three chapters of this book are so good. Like, I would be so delighted to receive this as a submission. And one of my favorite things about it is the setup. You have Gideon, who really hates Harrow, and I got the feeling from like the way Gideon would talk about Harrow that her feelings were kind of over dramatic. But then Harrow does something really, really shitty just to mess with Gideon. And it's at that moment where I realize, oh no, Gideon's not being dramatic at all. She is right. Harrow is terrible. So I really like that beginning section. Um, from then, and things kind of went downhill for me. There was definitely a point in this book where I got a little sick of Harrow. She definitely started to come off as obnoxious at some point. Granted, she's like 17 with way too much power and has been through a lot of traumatic stuff, so maybe I'll give her a pass for being annoying. But it also kind of felt like she was too like one dimensional, where like she would still be rude and cussing out Gideon in like really professional settings where you would think she would, act more professional or not say that, like, she would be like, oh, I hate you, Gideon, in the middle of like a professional speech. And it's like, she's supposed to be like royalty. You think she would have been trained better not to do that. And so after a while, I just kind of got sick of that. I wanted to see more depth to her character, that like she could like, put on a professional face around others and only cuss out Gideon like behind the scenes. And then I also wasn't super into this whole plot about like trying to uncover what it means to be a lictor or how to be a lictor. So there's other necromancers from the other, I don't know how many planets there are, 9 planets, I think. I don't remember. The world building's like, the world building is there, but it is very underexplained. So there's other people from the other planets who are also trying to learn how to be a lictor. And for some reason, there's this like competitive element between them, even though there's no one enforcing a competitive environment. So it didn't make sense to me. And then later on, when they do end up teaming up and helping each other, it's like, yeah, why didn't we do this to start with? It kind of felt really young adult to me, even though this is classified as an adult book. And I know like the whole debate of what qualifies as young adult versus adult is really trivial, but the main characters are teenagers. They're 17 and 18. And it has this very like school environment, even though some of the other necromancers are like older adults. So yeah, it kind of had this huge chunk in the middle where I was just kind of trying to power through it. But the ending did end up picking up, and I really liked the way this book ended. It really went in a completely different direction than I thought it would go. Um, Yeah, and it definitely impressed me. But I feel like for how long this book is, I only enjoyed like 5% of the book in the beginning and 5% at the end. And then there was like the 90% in the middle that I just wasn't crazy about. So I was kind of unimpressed with this book. I think part of it is it's definitely way more on the fantasy side than the sci fi side. I know they're from different planets and they have spaceships, and that's about all the sci fi elements that are in this book. You could remove them entirely, have them be on the same planet together, and it wouldn't change the story at all. So, yeah, maybe it is just because it was more of a fantasy, and maybe because it felt more like a young adult. And those are two genres that I don't always like. I'm really picky with those genres. I just don't think that like resonated with me. So I'm not sure I'm actually going to read on in this series. I powered through this book because my one friend had read it recently and I wanted to be able to talk to him about it. I know he's reading on in the series though, so I might just like let him finish the rest of the series and be like, hey, tell me what happens in the rest of the series. Because I got way too much I want to read that I don't want to waste my time on a book that I don't care too much about. Um, so this one was a 3.5-star read for me. I definitely understand why other people like it. It just wasn't mine. Cup of tea. Hi, Chloe. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me know how things are going for you. I feel bad whenever you go live. It's when I'm supposed to be going to work, so I can never join your live streams. But I'm so happy you joined me today. Alrighty. Rehydrating. Mm. Okay, so the next book I read this month was my buddy read of Ghoulfriends Forever, and I had buddy read this with Johara from the Witchy Reader. This is one of the tie-in novels for the Monster High series, following Venus McFlytrap, Rochelle Goyle, and Rebecca Steam. So I had read this series before. Um, like years ago, I had read the fourth book in this series because I think that one focused mostly on Venus, who is my favorite character. But I never read book one, so this was kind of a new experience for me. This is a middle grade, so it was a very simplistic book. In fact, like as soon as the like main antagonist was introduced, I could tell she was going to be the main antagonist. Um, but like again, this is written for kids, so it's something you have to expect, I think, when you read middle grade. Although I have read some like really deep, like middle grade books before. This one isn't one of those. Um, oh, so I read this for the Ghoulfriends Forever prompt, which was a book with female friendship. Obviously, it's about the three main characters being friends with each other. And I had also read this for the prompt Drop Dead Gorgeous, which was fashion slash clothes play an important role. There is a subplot in this book where Rochelle um, wants to design a nice outfit for one of the teachers at Monster High who is kind of feeling low, and she wants to help him get a date. So she designs this nice suit for him to wear. So that works for that prompt. Um, I absolutely loved Venus's character in this one. She's totally one of my favorite characters from Monster High. Um, because she is this very like rebellious character, and she definitely stands up for what she believes in. And I also like her friendship with Rochelle. I think that she really balances Rochelle out, because Rochelle is this like very like rule centric person. She does not like to break rules at all. And whereas Venus doesn't care about breaking rules. So I think the two characters balance each other out. Um, but Rebecca's character kind of confused me in this one. For some reason, she's like very. I don't want to say ditzy because that's not what I'm getting at. But her like quirk in this book is she's very like forgetful, and so like it makes for some comical moments in this story, but at the same time like I don't understand where that quirk came from because she's not like that in like any of the movies or the TV show. So that kind of confused me. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But otherwise, I enjoyed this read. You know, it's not my favorite middle grade, but it definitely follows the same vein as the Monster High TV show and the movies, and was very well done. So, yeah, I did enjoy reading this one. I think this was 4 stars for me. Same. I'm glad to hear that you're doing okay, but like also I've been so busy too and things have been so chaotic. And I know you sent me a message a while ago about us calling, and I definitely agree we should call sometime. I am so sorry I forgot to respond to that message. I have a habit of checking my messages first thing in the morning where I'm not even awake yet. And then I will be like, oh, I'll respond to this when I wake up more. And then I don't, and I forget. But it's been on the back of my mind. I have to respond to that. So, yeah, we should totally call sometime just to catch up because, yeah, I miss our conversations so much. Yes, this was intentional. I wanted to do a closet cosplay. So I chose Wednesday Adams because she's one of my favorite characters. All right, I got a couple more books to do. I read so much this past month. Okay, so the next book I'm going to talk about is Ring Shouts by P. Djeli Clark. So I read this one for the category steampunk, which was a historical read, because this book took place in, I think it took place in 1812. I don't remember off the top of my head, and I don't have this book physically with me, but it took place around when like the Ku Klux Klan was unfortunately at large. So like post Civil War, but like yeah, like not post civil rights. Not that civil rights is done. There's still issues with civil rights in America. But anyway, so this takes place in the past. It has a very historically relevant plot to it. So this follows three Black women who are hunting. Oh, Chloe says 1915. I was only off by 100 years. You know what? I think what confused me is the other book I was potentially going to read for this prompt was Kindred by Octavia Butler, and I think that one takes place in the early 1800s when slavery was happening. So I got the two confused. I'm really bad with remembering dates. Oh, but you have read this one. Oh my gosh. So let me know what you thought of it, Chloe. I would love to know. And yeah, like feel free to make comments on it as I discuss the book. This is exactly why I wanted to do this video live. So yeah, this one follows these three Black women who are hunting down Ku Klux Klans. But so there's some lore to this because the Ku Klux Klan aren't just Ku Klux Klan members, they're also like become monsters because they're possessed by these demons that feed on hate. So they were attracted to the Ku Klux Klan because, you know, they're very hateful towards Black people, did very terrible things towards Black people. And I don't remember the history or the lore that the book involved, but like someone had summoned these demons to help them fight Black people, and then it ended up possessing and turning the Ku Klux members into like physical monsters. So this book surprisingly had a lot more horror elements than I was expecting it to, but I absolutely loved it. I was so about the horror in this book. It like had such cool imagery, and it, again, like I really love that whole plot with like the demon possession and turning these humans into monsters because they're just so fueled by hate, and that hate like turn them into just like mindless monsters, which I think is such a good metaphor for actual real life hate. I also really liked that the main character had this weapon. It was a sword that was possessed by like all the souls of like black people who were wronged. And so it was just such a cool weapon for her to have, and like that it would like empower her too. Um I'm impressed you got the 15 right. I know. I got half of it right. I really liked it too. I love the idea, and the follow through was great, and the characters were fun despite it being such a short book. Yeah, honestly, like I think I read the book in 2 days. I actually listened to it on audiobook, but like I feel like Clark is so good at putting so much into such little space. This is the second book I've read by him. Um, that like it really felt like a fully realized novel. Um, So yeah, I thought like the metaphor of hate and like how it can twist and corrupt people was really well done. I think like the only thing I didn't like about this one, and this is just personal taste, but I've noticed something that Clark likes to do in his books is that he has the main character be this sort of like divine favorite character who is somewhat of like a chosen one and always has like some connection to like some sort of god, and that was the case in this one too. And I think it's just comes from me not really liking chosen one plots, but I've noticed that comes up a lot in his stories. And it's I don't hate the way that he does it. It's not like bad. It's just honestly something that isn't to my taste. It doesn't interest me. And those parts of the book were kind of ones where I was like dragging a little bit. Well, this was an absolutely fantastic read. I think this was another 4.5 star read for me. Absolutely. I read The Black God's Drum. I actually read that for Sci-Fi September last year. And that one is more of like a steampunk, but like an American and like black centric steampunk, which I really liked about it. And that one dealt with that one took place in the Civil War, I think, because they were fighting Civil War, or not Civil War, Confederate soldiers were like the main enemy in that one. And that one was like only 100 pages. It was such a short book, but it also took me a really long time to get through because, like I said, like he packs so much into such a small package. Did you really? Oh my gosh. That's insane. Oh, I wish that we had discussed that one too, because I think we buddy read something for Sci-Fi September last year. I don't No, we buddy read The Female Man together, I think. Yeah, that was super fun to buddy read. I can't believe you also read that one too. Like we have such the same brain. Alrighty. Hmm. I think the other category this book would have applied to is an empowering feminist read too, because again, the main characters were black women. And I also really like that. Like Clark's books tend to be, you know, like these like oppressed minorities, but fighting against their oppression. I think it's such a cool concept. That's the same prompt I read it for too. Because it's perfect. It's perfect for the steampunk prompt. I'm not super into steampunk myself. But I did like that one because it was such a different interpretation on steampunk. Okay, so the next book I read, this one I have, was Sybil Suit Blue by Rosel George Brown. This one I ran for Empowering Feminist Read, as well as a lawful good character. Because this follows a woman detective. So, you know, because she's a detective and enforces the law, she's a lawful good character. And I thought it was really empowering because, like, honestly, despite the fact that this was written in 1966, See, trying to remember dates again. The like this book feels so incredibly modern. So you got this like badass main female. You got this badass main female character who literally is kicking ass. Um, and she is, I think she's in her 50s. Like there's constant mentions to like her like having like gray in hair, and she's a single mom, and yet she is always like depicted as really like desirable, and she's kind of this like James Bond figure almost, where she is like kicking butt and like constantly wooing the opposite sex. But I really like it. She's a very like sexually empowered character, and again the fact that she is older and that's not depicted as a bad thing, you know, like she's still desirable. So I thought, like, honestly, this is so forward for honestly right now as well as 1966. So actually, you know what, I am getting all confused here. I also read this for the prompt plant monster because one of the main conflicts towards the end of the book deals with an alien plant life form that causes some trouble, which that's all I'm going to say on it because I don't want to spoil it. So, yeah. This takes place in a really cool futuristic city. There's these alien characters too that humanity is kind of struggling to get along with. There's a lot of conflict with aliens. And so it's just such a cool setting. I love Sibyl as a character. It's so fast paced. I'm not really a big detective fan. I'm not really into those kind of stories, but because it's so like adventure filled and like deals with like this sci-fi world building, it really like held my attention all the way throughout. So the way this book ends, it definitely sets up for a sequel. However, Rosel George Brown had passed, I think, a year after this book came out. And so her sequel was never published, which I find really sad because I definitely would have read another book in this series had it been published. So this one was probably my top read of the month. I was so impressed with it. And I ended up giving this one 5 stars. This is my only 5-star read of the month. I should add you on Storygraph because I just started using Storygraph. His Goodreads updated, and I don't like the update, the updated version of Goodreads, so I'm switching over to Storygraph. So we should exchange info on that. Yeah, that's so crazy that we read the same book without even knowing. And I literally have Storygraph open right now because I wanted to see what I rated everything. Okay, I got 2 more books left. All right, so the next book I read was Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. Ironically, because we're talking about Sci-Fi September, I read the first Dune in Sci-Fi September last year. So yeah, over a year later, I finally read the next book in the series. So I read this one for the prompts, a chosen one main character, because Paul Atreides is like this, you know, like honestly just a chosen one main character, and especially in this book it really explores the fact that like he's become this messiah figure to the Fremen, and he doesn't like that at all, which was something that was predicted in book 1 and he was really freaked out about. This one takes place, I think, 12 years after book 1 finishes, and so Paul is now the emperor of the known universe. He's like in his 30s, and again, like he's become this messiah figure. He doesn't like that, and he also is having this conflict of he needs to have an heir, and he hasn't had one yet, and so he has a political marriage with this woman who he doesn't love, and then he has his Fremen partner Chani, who he does love. but she is like suffering with infertility, so there's all this conflict between that. But I also was impressed, this did have a lot of family presence as well, including with the wives. There was also a lot with his sister Aaliyah, who is now 15 and kind of just coming into her powers. Um, and so, everyone I had talked to about this book who had read the Dune series already said that this was the slump of the series. So I went into this book not expecting much at all. And I honestly was kind of impressed. It had its low moments. I think the moments where Paul's sister Aaliyah is kind of weirdly sexualized, um, which, like, I get it because she's a teenager, you have hormones, but at the same time, it's like, why these details? I didn't totally like that. Um, the next book offers some explanation why she was acting that way, but I personally didn't like that. Fortunately, that was only like in the beginning of the book, and it did end up fading out. And then some really cool character development happened with Paul in this book, and the way that this book ends, I really loved. I think it was so cool, with one exception. Like, why why does Frank Herbert have to do his female character so dirty? Is all I'm gonna say without spoiling it. Um, but yeah, I think overall, like, I honestly ended up liking it more than I thought I would. This is very tonally different from the first book. I feel like the first book had a lot more action and it had like a bigger world, and this was more confined to just like, I can't fucking remember the planet name, Arrakis. It was mainly confined to Arrakis and dealt with more like political themes rather than like, like the action of like, oh, like trying to survive in the desert and like you got like these sandworms and stuff. uh, Sorry, I'm reading ahead. Old man sci-fi writers typical, right? Honestly, most of the time when I'm reading older sci-fi, a lot of it's forgivable, but every now and then there's something and I'm like, really? Come on. Behave. So yeah, I ended up surprisingly really liking this one. I say, as I'm about to say, I only rated this one 3 stars. And part of the reason why I rated it 3 stars is because I do um, rate books in this series against each other. And while I just absolutely loved Dune and was so impressed with it, compared to Dune, I did not like this one as much. But I'm glad I read it, and I have started reading Children of Dune, which is book 3. And yeah, I'm having fun with this series. I'm probably gonna finish it. Uh, I highly recommend reading Dune, especially because you are a sci-fi reader. It's just one of those classics where you gotta just read it. Or like, I was gonna say like you could watch the movie, but I think the movie was pretty close to it, but it also took some liberties with it. Um, but yeah, that way you can kind of get a feel of it if you want to read it, because Dune is huge. It's 800 pages. And like that's why I put off reading it for so long until last year when I was like, I gotta read Dune. Like, I can't do this anymore. I can't put it off anymore. Well, let me know if you do end up reading it, what you end up thinking about it. Okay, now I'm on to my last book of the month, which was Hooked by A.C. Wise. When did I read this one for? This one, okay. So I read this one for the abroad category. Again, I was trying so hard to do a book that wasn't Britain because like I wanted to do something more unique than that, but this is what I ended up doing. I read 2 books that took place in Britain instead. Whatever. And then I read this one for a character who switches sides. So this is a Peter Pan retelling. This is book 2 to Wendy Darling, And so Wendy Darling is like a sequel to Peter Pan. It takes place when Wendy is an adult and she goes back to Neverland. And then this book takes place, I think, 8 years after Wendy Darling, when her daughter is an adult. And this one follows mostly Captain Hook, who was kind of missing from book one, but he was missing in a way that really intrigued me. The implication of when she went back to Neverland and Hook wasn't there. It was like, well, what happened to him? And so I was so intrigued to find out what had happened to him. And I really liked book one. I'm not a big retelling person, and I don't really care for Peter Pan that much either. So that being said, the fact that I really enjoyed book one says a lot. I just think that AC Wise did so many cool things with it, with how she characterizes Neverland, as well as she has this very feminist twist on everything. It's very rooted in gender roles and how they affect both men and women. So I think she did such a cool job with that. And so I was really excited to read this one. And it fit very well for the prompt, a character who switches sides, because it follows Hook, who is, traditionally the villain character. But what is revealed about his past is he's kind of just this random dude who got sucked into Neverland, and because Peter Pan gets whatever he wants and he wanted Hook to be this pirate captain villain, Neverland made it so. And so he's kind of throughout this story struggling between being the hero and being the villain. So I thought it worked so well for that prompt. However, I was kind of underwhelmed by this book, to be honest, especially since I just absolutely loved Wendy Darling. This book just didn't connect with me, and I feel so bad to say that. I think a lot of it has to deal with the fact that, like I said, I don't really care for retellings, I don't really care for Peter Pan, and it was kind of missing what I liked so much about book one. It does still follow Wendy and her daughter from book one, and they're older, but I kind of wish they weren't included in this book as much as I like their characters, and I did enjoy seeing them in this book. They didn't really add anything to the story. I understand why Wise kept them in. They do have an important role near the end, but as far as their personal plots, I felt like because they were included, they kind of regressed to who they were at the beginning of Wendy Darling, and they kind of lost all of that character development and had to redo it again. On one hand, I understand that healing is a constant process, so it does reflect that, but it was kind of frustrating to read, to see them act that way again. And another thing I didn't like about it was I think it took away from Hook's story a little bit. I wish it was just completely about him. And that she spent more time talking about his life and his relationships. Especially because, what ends up being his main villain in this book is his crew that ends up doing mutiny on him. That's bad sentence right there. And so I was kind of expecting that to resolve, because to me that kind of made me think of being stuck in an abusive situation with other people who are being abused as well, in the same way, and kind of how sometimes that can turn people against each other. I thought there was going to be some resolution between them, and there really wasn't. So I wasn't too crazy about how this book ended. And yeah, along the way, I never really felt particularly interested in the plots, but I just kept reading because I liked the characters. So I wasn't too crazy about this one. It was only a 3-star read. which means I'm glad I read it, but honestly wasn't impressed. But if you haven't read Wendy Darling, I highly recommend that one because that was genuinely one of my favorite reads this year. And I'm pretty sure like people who do really like retellings will enjoy this one because it is beautifully written. It's just the plot didn't catch me. I did watch the film and I really liked it. Don't remember the plot, but it was fun. The plot's a little convoluted. I will admit that. There's kind of a lot going on in Dune. But yeah, it's really enjoyable. I think, like, particularly, I'm talking about the newest Dune. I think they do follow the book really well. So yeah, if you watched that one and enjoyed it, I think you will enjoy the book possibly even more because there is even more in the book that they didn't quite leave in. A lot of like character motivations I think weren't fully explained, whereas I had read the book first and then watched the movie, so I knew what was going on. Excuse me. All right. Oh, I am totally goofing up that. Okay. So that was all of the books that I read this year. This month. That's all the books I read this month. Again, like I said, I read 11 out of the 12 prompts, which is pretty fantastic. I'm very happy with it. And yeah, I generally enjoyed what I read, even though there was quite a few like 3-star reads. It felt like just a very productive month where it was like at least I'm like checking off these books from my list that I wanted to read. And I felt like everything I read like perfectly fit the prompts that I read them for too. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad you were here, and it was really cool that you had read at least one of these books. I wasn't expecting anyone to actually join this live, so I was pretty excited for that. If you have to go, I understand, Chloe. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I'm definitely starting to feel my throats get a little raw, but I did want to talk about the Monster High reboot before I leave. I don't know if you're into Monster High, and it's okay if you're not. So I have, like, it's fine if you want to leave, and anyone else who's watching this later if you want to leave. But I wanted to briefly touch on my thoughts on the Monster High reboot, because I did do the Monster High readathon this year, and it just so happened to be the same month that Monster High was rebooted. So I had seen the new Monster High movie, which was on Paramount Plus. So I'm gonna just very briefly do my thoughts on that. Thank you again for joining me. I really do appreciate it, and have fun chatting with your friend, and we should totally do a call together sometime. Soon, too. Soon. All right. Bye. So yeah, my general thoughts on the Monster High movie. So this one was the first ever like live action movie that Monster High had done. So I'm not super crazy about all of these like live action films of cartoons. I feel like it's such a weird trend, and I'm a little confused why they did it as well for Monster High, and especially because they definitely had a modest budget for this one. But I will say, I thought the casting choices were really well, and I think the music to the film was really good. I think it had a lot of the same spirit as the Monster High movies. I said in my last live video that it kind of has the same essence as like Halloween Town if it was a musical, where it is kind of just like, like this portal fantasy. That's probably what it makes me think of when I think about Halloween Town, is that it's a portal fantasy where there's these magical beings. And I really liked Halloween Town as a kid because I grew up with it, and because like to me as a child it was so magical. But I think if I had seen Halloween Town for the first time at this age, probably wouldn't be too crazy about it. Um, so I think, yeah, I think maybe if I was younger, I might have liked the movie a lot more. But also, like, I didn't hate it either. Um, I thought, as far as costumes went, I thought they were so well done, especially because all of the outfits, you could tell that they were just sourced rather than um, actually made for the movie. So I thought, like, everything, all the outfits they got together for the main three characters were just so perfectly in character. Whoever did that did such a good job. I want to, like, reapply my lipstick. But inevitably it's gonna end up on my teeth. That's another thing I would have edited out if this wasn't a live video. Okay. So yeah, I thought the outfits were amazing. I think particularly with Frankie and Draculaura, perfectly captured their characters. So well done. Frankie was probably my favorite character in the movie. I thought they were so funny. And I liked their quirk of just having a lot of knowledge, but not really knowing what to do with it. So it's kind of just like, you know, um, randomly saying stuff, saying random facts when they came up. So I thought that was so cool. I thought that was so funny. As far as like the whole plot with like Claudine being half human, it was kind of just okay. I'm a little conflicted about Claudine being the main character in this. I think Frankie could have been a way easier main character, especially in like the original like introductory movie. Like Frankie was the main character because they're like newly built, newly created, and going to school for the first time. Like their whole deal is so perfect for that. Um, so yeah, it didn't make sense too much why they chose Claudine instead. And also like they kind of made her an only child. So that means that all of her sibling characters that we had from the original aren't going to exist in this one. And I was a little disappointed about that as well. I wonder if they're going to retcon that at some point. Because I'm like, how could you get rid of Claude and Howleen? That's so weird. I wasn't crazy about the crush plot between Claudine and Deuce. They're two characters I never would have shipped together in the first place. I never would even considered it, and I think it was only really included just to give Cleo a reason to dislike Claudine. Also, I don't know why Cleo and Deuce had to be broken up for this film. I feel like a lot of like the plot choices in this film were really weird to me. I understand that they kind of wanted to go in a slightly new direction from the original stuff, but yeah, there's just a lot of weird choices, especially with like the character of Laguna. Obviously, she looks way different from her original appearance, and like the one scene we really get with her, she acts completely different than this very calm, collected, wise character she was in the original. So I was really confused about that, as well as like I don't feel like I got a good idea of who this new Laguna is, even though she's so different. I also don't know if I liked Gulia's character either. She definitely offered some comedic moments, but again, like I didn't know who she is. They just gave her so little time. And as far as the main villain, totally guessed it as soon as promotional images came out, and there's this new character that is completely unrecognizable. So I kind of figured out who was going to be the main villain. Um, but I don't want to put down the movie entirely because I do think like considering it's a kids movie, I think it definitely had the same spirit of the original movies. I think that's all I have on that. Oh, I do really like the choice that Frankie is now non-binary. I think that's such a cool interpretation of their character, just because of who Frankie is in the original works. Um, like Frankie is like this new person who is still kind of figuring themselves out, and so I think like especially for someone who's just like like gain consciousness in a teenage body, I feel like they really wouldn't have any connection to like either being a woman or a man. I don't think they would understand the concept of gender yet. And so I don't mean I'm trying not to like invalidate like non-binary people with this, and I don't think Frankie needs to decide a gender for themselves. But I just think that, like, yeah, organically, they probably would identify as someone like gender neutral or not with gender at all if they're just thrown into life and not really like grown up with you know gender expectations. uh so sorry if I phrased that really bad, but I do really like that choice. My only like criticism of it is like besides that one line where they say their pronouns, where they introduce themselves and say their pronouns, I don't think anyone really uses their pronouns. That's like the only scene where it's really addressed. And it would have been cool to see that carry throughout the movie, that anytime someone talked to Frankie or talked about Frankie, that they would use the correct pronouns. My voice is getting really hoarse, so I think the very last thing that I want to do, I'm going to make very quick. Because the other thing I really like about Monster High is that I collect the dolls. And so one of the cool things that happened this past month is the third generation dolls came out, and of course I had to get some of them because I collect them. So I'm just going to show them very quickly and review them. So the first one I got was Draculaura, and she is so adorable. When I first saw promotional images of this doll, I was immediately in love with her. I love the two-tone hair color. It's so cute. I also really like her unique body type. One of the things I didn't like about the first generation Draculaura dolls is that despite her in the movies and the webtoons always being shorter than all of the other characters, her doll was the same size as everyone. And I think that's because they only created the like little sister dolls later down the line, so they just kept them all the same size. So I do like that she is actually shorter. I'll show you compared to Frankie, who will go into detail later. So yeah, she is shorter, and she's also like thicker than Frankie and the other dolls. So I do like that we get to see unique body types in this one besides just different heights. And I hope they continue that with other characters too. And as far as the outfit goes, it's pretty decent material, and the shoes I'm a little underwhelmed by, but they're still really cute. It's still a very cute outfit. The hair quality isn't the best. It's not the worst I've felt on a doll. But there is kind of like this slight greasy feel on it that I don't super love. Also, the dolls don't come with their own stands, which I didn't like. These stands I have them on were stands I had bought and just so happened to fit them. So yeah, I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't come with stands this time, but I am really happy that they don't come with those stupid plastic hairbrushes, because those are the worst. She lost her little ring. I knew that was gonna happen. They're just the worst. They don't work well on doll hair. Please don't use them on doll hair. And it's just a waste of plastic, in my opinion. I do like that they come with more accessories. I definitely think that, like, for like a little kid playing with these dolls, that they're a lot more fun to play with, probably, than the original ones. And I think my last criticism is that they don't come with their journals that the originals came with. And there's not really much in the way of details on the box, like explaining the character or their story, which on one hand, that leads to more creativity on the child playing with them's part. Also, I thought like the journals was such a cool part of Monster High. And so, lastly, we'll talk about Frankie, who's the only other doll I bought from the reboot line. My feelings are pretty much very similar to how I feel about Draculaura, which, like, the hair quality could be better. I do love that their hair is mostly white and with just a couple of streaks. I think that is so cute. Their face is absolutely adorable. I did notice that they don't have the bolts in the neck like the original Frankie did, and I don't know if that's just like because it's a choking hazard, even though like they have earrings that come out. I don't know. I don't get it. I actually really love their outfit, and I like it way better than the original Frankie design. I think that like the like preppy school look is so perfect for their character, and I like that they're kind of trans colors too. They have the colors of the trans flag, and I love their shoes. That like their platform shoes rather than heels, just because yeah, all of the originals were always heels. I like that there's some variety there. And I like this interpretation of them having a mechanical leg. I think that is so cool and so different. Uh, so yeah, honestly, I like this reboot, um, especially compared to what happened to the second generation reboot, where I just did not like any of the choices that they made with both the movie that they came out with and the dolls that they came out for the second generation were super cheap, and it was so obvious. I think these dolls are a little more cheaper made than the original line, but I do think that the quality is still there and the attention is still there. So I think they found kind of a happy middle ground between Generation 1 and Generation 2, where everything was a disaster. And so, yeah, I'm feeling pretty optimistic and looking forward to more coming out for Monster High. And so I'm done talking. Uh, yeah, if you're watching this video later, thank you for watching. And I will see you next time. Let me know what you're dressing up for Halloween. There we go. That's my closing question. And also make sure you support your local library and shop independent bookstores when you can. Please stay tuned.